Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens for this special edition of Orioles on the Verge as we come to you a little bit earlier than usual in the week to react to the Orioles signings of Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez. We're going to get into those contracts, what they mean for the Orioles, not just for the rest of the offseason, but for 2025 and beyond. And all of that will be coming up on today's episode of Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the access and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA and college basketball, NHL to UFC. Head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE, that's BLEAV, for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Now, on Saturday, in very close succession, we had two major stories break involving the Orioles. One of them is their signing of outfielder Tyler O'Neill, who agreed to a 3-year, $49.5 million contract after a resurgent year in 2024 with the Boston Red Sox. That contract will include an opt-out after the 2025 season. The Orioles also agreed to terms with Gary Sanchez, who will take over as a backup catcher next year. The reported term on that for Sanchez is 1 year, $8.5 million. Now, a couple of things that are clear. One, we are seeing the Orioles spend a little bit. Right now, Roster Resource has their opening day payroll projected at $122 billion, which would be the highest in any season since 2018. And they're probably not done yet, as we're going to talk about today. But we'll focus first on these two moves, starting with O'Neill. Nick, I think that you have brought up O'Neill's name a few times this offseason as someone who could be a fit for the Orioles. Right-handed hitting outfielder who has a lot of the traits that the Orioles like in hitters. Can hit for power, draws his fair share of walks, though that also comes with a high strikeout rate, and he masses left-handed pitching. So what are your thoughts on O'Neill as a player and how he fits into the Orioles?
Yeah, it was, just initial thoughts. I loved this signing last night. It was a very pleasant surprise, just kind of sitting on the couch watching some, college football championship games, and not one but two signings. Was pretty cool. But with O'Neill, yeah, I think it was one of the preview episodes that was just me and you when we were going over, listeners submitted free agent, suggestions and trades, and everything was Teoscar Hernandez, and Santander, and it was like, okay, we know the Orioles are in the market for a right-handed hitting outfielder. At the time, and I think it became a more popular kind of person name to throw out there as time went on. But at the time, no one was talking about Tyler O'Neill. I'm like, I think this could be a really good fit because he has that right-handed hitting power outfielder. And at that time, too, when we recorded that, I think I really started to accept the fact that Santander wasn't coming back. Right. And so looking into more of these options, I'm like, O'Neill seems like a really fantastic fit just because like 7 big league seasons, right? Take away 2020 because that was a COVID shortened year, but he played in 50 or 60 games that year. But 7 seasons, he's only clipped 100 games played twice. But again, in both those seasons, he was phenomenal. Top 10 in MVP voting with the Cardinals in 2021, I think it was, a 143 WRC plus. This year, he was a 131 WRC plus. Like when he's healthy, and that is the biggest question mark, obviously, is the health. But when he's healthy, that is a middle of the order power hitting bat that this lineup desperately needs. You mentioned the strikeouts. He's going to strike out a good bit, but he also walked more than 11% of the time last season. So it's elite bat speed, hard hit rates, barrel percentage. I think the biggest question is just the health. And like you mentioned, the versus lefties, he's not going to be a strictly platoon bat. He's going to be in this lineup very frequently, but I mean, a 750 slugging percentage and 1179 OPS for left-handed pitching, like pull out the correct analytical phrase here. He's stupid good against lefties. Like that's doesn't hurt at all. So yeah, I love this signing. I think it's a very, we can talk about the contract too, of course, but just his fit, who he is as a player. I think this is a big thumper in the middle of this lineup that's going to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, absolutely. I was coming into the offseason saying my two big targets were Blake Snell for the top of the rotation and Tyler O'Neill for right field, just because I felt like you could get similar value to those guys as the guys that, people are clamoring for ahead of them in the pecking order. without giving up the qualifying offer or the draft pick because of the qualifying offer. And when I wrote my dream offseason column on Friday afternoon, at first I typed Tyler O'Neill into my free agent signing. I typed him into the projected lineup, and then I saw the report about the Cubs potentially moving Seiya Suzuki, and that intrigued me a little bit more. So I deleted Tyler O'Neill and put Suzuki in there. But it's the same idea. It's a guy that can crush lefties. You know, he was 215 WRC plus, I think, against lefties, only behind Aaron Judge's 218, something like that. And I mean, he had a fantastic season for Boston last year. He struck out a third of the time, but we know the Orioles don't care about that as much as long as you're impacting the ball, which he did. He had 31 home runs in 113 games, 2.5 WAR, 131 WRC plus, which was better than Anthony Santander, who he's replacing. Obviously, a little riskier because he's, Santander's pretty consistently ever since 2020 when he missed half of the shortened season due to I think it was an oblique injury. Santander's been pretty reliable, consistent, but O'Neill, he's got a lot of the same tools, hits for power, but he walks more. I think he does more of what the Orioles are looking for when they're developing hitters. It's good swing decisions and impact the ball. He does both of those things very well. The only thing that he struggles with is swing and miss with balls in the zone, which we also know that the Orioles have a lot of guys they're working with in that department with Vance Honeycutt and Judd Fabian, et cetera, et cetera. Love the move. I think between Cowser, Mullins, O'Neill, and Kjerstad, I think you have a great 4 outfielders there that you can work with. O'Neill can start in a corner outfield spot versus left-handed pitching, maybe get some DH time. For his career, he's got a 133 OPS plus against lefties, a 90 OPS plus against righties. So I'm sure he'll still see his fair share of righties. He'll probably be mostly everyday guy, but really it's just a great option to have against lefties. And the Orioles said they were looking for a right-handed outfielder, power bat. Well, they got one.
Yeah, I think it's an important point that both of you brought up, which is that although you look at O'Neill's profile and he masses lefties, and you have Heston Kjerstad around right now on the roster, that if he's still in the organization after the end of the offseason, you're going to want him to get more playing time in the major leagues. That said, they're clearly not signing O'Neill to play 2 or 3 days a week at $16.5 million next year. They could have gotten Randall Grichuk or traded for a right-handed bat that was not going to cost them as much as O'Neill will this year. Now, with Santander, I think it's worth kind of looking at the comparison of the two players. As Bob said, Santander has been more durable in the last few years than O'Neill. Generally, the profile, if you want to look at their offensive production, both have their issues with strikeouts, although O'Neill will walk a little bit more than Santander. Earlier in his career, O'Neill ran very well. Injuries, though, have kind of taken their toll. That has cut down his range a little bit in the outfield. That said, he's about even with Santander in that department. And on arm strength, where both players grade out pretty well, O'Neill comes out a little bit ahead. He was in the 82nd percentile last year in arm strength, even as all of his other fielding metrics seem to take a step back. So it does feel like, especially with the short right field at Camden Yards, O'Neill can be a good fit defensively.
Yeah, I have no issues defensively at all. Bob talked about the Seiya Suzuki thing the other day. I was front seat of that train when I saw that and looking into this, and he was kind of the same thing defensively, kind of about even there with Santander. But it was just I didn't realize Suzuki's always been that guy like you draft later in rounds on your fantasy team. He's just there, and you're like, you do good. But I didn't realize just how good that bat was. But O'Neill is kind of in that same vein where. Same as Suzuki too, where yeah, he strikes out a lot, but he doesn't chase a lot either. So yeah, if we can fix those end zone whiff rate issues, then like that's gonna create a higher ceiling there for O'Neill. And defensively, like if this is virtually a 1-for-1 swap, cool. I think if that's about even and you're getting a hitter who walks more and a hitter who I think ceiling wise, I don't know if you guys would agree or not. I'd say Tyler O'Neill's ceiling is probably a tick higher than Santander's. It's very risky. You guys talked about the injuries there. It is very risky, but that's one of the reasons why I like this pick so much, because like if the signing doesn't pan out, sure, he can, trigger the player option. He's back. That's going to suck. But like this deal isn't going to hamstring the organization if it doesn't pan out. On the flip side, he's got real potential to like outplay this contract, where if it's 1 year and he does really well and he's like, I'm out, I'm going to go back to free agency and get this bigger deal, then it's a win for the Orioles. It's a win for O'Neill. It's a win-win kind of signing here. But for the Orioles, what's most important, I think, is the defense is fine. No big issue there. It's that big middle of the order bat. And it's still leaving you available to land this big fish in the pitching market. And it's like, yeah, I think it was Mark Feinside who said the Orioles were in on Randall Grichuk before this signing as well. I'm like, Randall Grichuk would have been fine. We would have came on here and been like, sure, we would have hyped him up. Like you pick the stats that make him look the best. And all right, it would have been a fine signing. You hope Kjerstad takes that next step forward. Grichuk fills in well, compliments him well. It would have been fine, but I'm so sick and tired of just fine. Like this is a risk. It's a gamble, but like, let's have some fun. Let's gamble on this. And like, let's really push the chips in here. It's a win now move. I think that hopefully pans out, but
Yeah, I mean, I like it for that reason as well. Yeah, Grichuk would have been great platoon outfielder with Kjerstad potentially, but yeah, O'Neill used to be a super freak athlete, stole 30 bases in 2021, hit 30 home runs, playing center field. But now he's more of a lumbering hawk type of guy who can handle a corner and has a cannon for an arm, as we've talked about. So maybe more Austin Hayes-esque, but probably even a little bit better than him. Yeah, I had another point I was going to say, but I've lost it.
Before we move on to talk about Sanchez, I do want to talk about Santander a little bit because O'Neill's signing likely spells the end of his time as an Oriole. And Nick said it, I think that as the offseason has progressed, we sense that Santander probably wasn't coming back. And not anything specific to that other than maybe that you're not hearing a lot about the Orioles in negotiations. To keep Santander, it also seems like players are going for a little bit more than we expected at the onset of the offseason. So maybe Santander is in line for a big 5-year contract somewhere, like some outlets have suggested he could get. Just kind of, let's say that this is the end of the road for Anthony Santander. What he has done for this franchise over the last several years has been nothing short of valuable. He's going to probably end up being an Orioles Hall of Famer one day. But over the next few years, what is his loss going to mean? Are we going to look back in a few years and think, well, the Orioles got it wrong. They should have held on to Santander and not gone after Tyler O'Neill? Or is it going to be a situation where maybe the Orioles get out a year or two too early, but long term, letting him walk and get a big contract elsewhere turns out to be the correct move?
I think that Orioles fans will miss Anthony Santander, but I don't think it's like a huge mistake. I think it's kind of expected that you're going to let him go, get the draft pick, and then sign someone else to replace him. Or maybe, some people just thought they'd roll with Heston Kjerstad as a replacement. But I think it's going to suck to see him in another uniform, especially if he signs in Boston or Toronto or New York, somewhere like that, where you're seeing him more often. He's going up against you in important games. That will definitely hurt. But I think he had a great run. He's 30 years old. Tyler O'Neill's actually 29, a year younger than him. So he's past his prime, his peak. I bet you 2024 ends up being the best year of his career ultimately, and would have loved to have him back. And still, if they still want to trade Kjerstad for Garrett Crochet or something and bring Anthony Santander back anyway, sure, why not? But yeah, and real quick, I did remember what I was going to say about Tyler O'Neill. Last thing is that the contract, big contract for the Orioles, I think it's the first multi-year deal that Mike Elias has given out as GM. But the opt-out after the first year, like Nick said, it's win-win, because if Tyler O'Neill goes out here and hits 35 home runs and is healthy most of the year and is like, hey, I could enter next offseason at 30 years old, just like Anthony Santander, and get a 4 to 5 year deal somewhere for more money, then he opts out. He didn't get a qualifying offer in the past, so the Orioles could qualifying offer him as well and potentially earn another draft pick. And if he does struggle enough where he's like, nah, I'll just stay on this 3-year deal, it's most likely because he's hurt and not because he's a bad player now. So you would keep him around and he'd hopefully get healthy at some point and contribute. So, yeah, I think it's really one of the rare instances where a player opt out is as good for the team as it is for the player.
And I think even last year, I mean, you can look at the whole career as a whole, obviously, but just last year alone, I think more the time he missed was more so due to like freak injury type stuff, and not like, oh, it's the groin again, oh, it's the hamstring again. So it's good news there. But yeah, with Santander, I agree. I think it was the Orioles. I feel like the Orioles kind of knew like the price hike he was going to get in the offseason. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if the conversations internally for a long time were like, we're not bringing him back. Like we'll make an offer. Of course, we'll stay in contact, but like he knows what our max is. We also know that he's not going to accept that. So like, best of luck, Tony. I feel like might have been the conversation in the background. Who knows? But yeah, it's with Santander. That's going to be the talking point with, the first time O'Neill goes on the IL this year. I feel like a lot of people will potentially be screaming up in arms that, you should have brought Santander back because of his lack of injuries recently. But it's just wait and see. I think I like this risk, though. You talk about the money. It's less money than what you're going to have to pay Santander. And I know we don't have to worry about penny pension anymore, but it is less money. It leaves you available to go off and continue to be aggressive in the pitching market and such. And you're still getting a guy who's just as productive as Santander, could potentially be a little bit more productive than Santander. And the wild card here is Heston Kjerstad is still there and could still break out in a major way this year. So I think this is just wherever he goes, and I do think it's going to be the AL East. Boston loses O'Neill to Baltimore. If Soto goes to the Mets, which seems more and more likely, if he goes to the Mets, the Yankees lose the big outfielder. Apparently, I forget who tweeted it, but the Blue Jays, somebody said the Blue Jays are going to, quote, do something stupid this offseason. Not saying that signing Santander is stupid, but probably the money that they're going to be forced to give him would be stupid money. It's going to be one of those three teams, I feel like, and that's going to hurt a lot. But I feel like it's an instance where when he comes back to Camden Yards, that whole stadium is going to give him the standing ovation, and there's going to be tears. And then we're going to beat him and whichever team he plays for. But wish him the best in his next journey. But also one more thing about this outfield, though. I don't know. Do you guys think we're done? Or are we going to roll with Daz Cameron potentially? Who, I mean, mashed lefties last year with Oakland, 134 WRC plus against lefties. Or do we think there's still maybe a Randall Grichuk type signing or an Austin Slater, type move that they will still bring to shore up things?
I wouldn't be shocked if they went that way and brought in another outfielder, well, especially if Heston Kjerstad is still potentially out there as an option to help trade for an ace level pitcher. But I personally think these four can handle it because Cowser can cover center field. I think even O'Neill played some center field for Boston last year, but we're obviously not going to want that to happen. But in a pinch, if you need someone to play left field, I feel like Jordan Westburg could slide to left field, especially if they prepare him for that a little bit in spring training. And then you could put Mayo at third base or Ramon Arias, what have you. I think hopefully there's enough flexibility with the bench pieces and the guys in the lineup that we won't need to have a fifth outfielder because all respect to Daz Cameron, love him as a depth option in AAA, but I'm not sure I love him as a guy getting semi-regular playing time at the major league level.
Yeah, I feel like they probably will bring in one more outfielder, at least someone who can be a defensive replacement or a pinch runner option in the later innings. It may not happen until spring training, honestly, but it's entirely possible that it does. So I wouldn't rule that out. And then, with Kjerstad possibly being a trade chip, that's something we can get to down the line in the offseason. But for now, let's assume that Kjerstad is back. I think they would still want one more person in there who's going to be a little bit better than Daz Cameron to do some of those specialized things on defense.
Yeah, that's a good point about spring training. Maybe Ramon Arias traded for the outfield version of Ramon Arias, something like that.
Yeah, but we'll have to see what happens. And we'll move on now to Gary Sanchez, who signed a one-year deal with the Orioles to essentially become the replacement to James McCann as a backup catcher. Now, Sanchez, when he broke into the league a little less than a decade ago with the Yankees, was one of the more intriguing young stars in the game. He finished second Rookie of the Year voting in 2016, despite appearing in only 53 games that year. And then over the next 3 seasons, he would log 2 All-Star appearances. After that, though, things just kind of dropped off for him. His inability to make consistent contact caught up with him. He had a few seasons affected by injuries. The Yankees eventually moved on from him, traded him to the Twins. He then, after a year with the Twins, split the 2023 season between the Padres and the Mets, and then spent all of last year in Milwaukee as their backup catcher. And really, if you want to summarize Sanchez in a word, it would probably be, or in a sentence, it would be bat first backup catcher at this point. The defensive numbers have never been great with Sanchez, and that continues to be the case. And still strikes out, I think, a little bit more than you would like to see. He's not going to hit for high average, but he does give you home run power. So the way I kind of see this, and I'm curious to get your guys' thoughts, is that I feel like the Orioles, knowing that they only want to catch on a one-year deal because of Samuel Basallo being in AAA and likely being big league ready in 2026, decided to try to raise the ceiling a little bit offensively out of that spot, because while Sanchez and McCann are similar in some ways, I'll get into in a little bit here, Sanchez unquestionably has more power and gives you a little bit more of the bat. I know for myself, I'm kind of lukewarm to this signing, but Nick, starting with you, what are your thoughts on this move?
No strong opinion. It's the backup catcher job, right? It's a 1 year, it's a stopgap deal. Like you said, the hopes, obviously, Samuel Basallo being that guy, maybe at the end of this year. Although I feel like there's no need to rush Basallo, unless he just forces the issue by the end of the year. But this is the guy. This is just someone to come in for 1 year. And I think it was after the show. I don't think it was during the show when we were talking about this. But these two things may not be connected at all. But I almost wonder, you've got Robinson Chirinos there now as the bench coach. One of the big reasons why I think a lot of people wanted McCann back was the leadership qualities, right? Which made a lot of sense. But I almost wonder if like Robinson Chirinos can help provide some of those leadership qualities for Adley and other catchers and the pitching staff and et cetera. And so you don't necessarily need to bring James McCann back. It doesn't necessarily need to be like, an Elias Diaz or one of these premier defensive backstops either when, let's shoot for the moon. Again, just like the Tyler O'Neill signing, let's shoot a little bit higher and bring in a more offensive-minded catcher, like you said. And I like it. You move the wall back in just a little bit, change those dimensions again, and immediately sign 2 right-handed power hitters. Overcorrection, right? But yeah, he's league average bat last year, like 96 WRC plus. That's top 30 in the game, near 10% walk rate. It was almost double what James McCann gave you. So same thing. Both of these signings give you more power and a higher walk rate. That's what I like about both of these signings. And defensively, sure, yeah, is he great overall defensively? No. Is he better than McCann? Yes. I think the defensive metrics spell that out pretty clearly. So I like it. I think I saw a lot of people kind of upset about the $8.5 million price tag. Who cares? Like, it does
We're
not
rich
matter.
now.
Yeah. It's not our money. Who cares? That's not going to stop anybody. That's not going to stop another signing. Congrats. Let's pop some home runs. And that's all you can hope for.
Yeah, exactly. It's the backup catcher. I think not casual fans, but people who aren't as in tune with the advanced metrics would be very surprised to see that James McCann was really bad defensively behind the plate last year. And obviously he's not a great bat when he's standing at the plate hitting either. So I think, well, hopefully anyone we would assign would have been an improvement over James McCann. But I think Gary Sanchez definitely is, especially offensively. And surprisingly, he's been about average defensively, I feel like, since he got out of New York and played with the Twins and then the Brewers, who are really good at getting catchers better defensively and framing wise behind the plate. Hopefully he can continue to carry that with him. Let's see. He had a Steamer projects him to have a 98 WRC plus with the bat. James McCann projected to have an 83 WRC plus. Like you said, he's going to be about average to a little bit above walk rate, strike out more than you like. And again, just like with Tyler O'Neill, it's just about he does things the Orioles are preaching. So it's not like he has to go fully against the grain to come in here and do what the hitting coaches are going to want him to do. And like Jack says in the comments, at least maybe he could come in here and help end a game for the Yankees in the wrong favor. No, worded weird, but by me. But yeah, hopefully he can help us take down the Yankees and the rest of the AL East. And look, he's probably going to play start 50 games behind the plate if he stays healthy all year. But at least you don't have a zero on the bench if you need a pinch hit late to try to tie or win a game. It's a better option than Rene Pinto, that's for sure.
Yeah, I think that with backup catcher, there's a tendency to overanalyze that position a little bit. But when Adley Rutschman plays as much as he does, and this signing, I think, pretty clearly spells out that the Orioles don't plan to change Adley's workload next year, the backup catcher's importance is going to be diminished by that a little bit. And if Adley Rutschman is hurt, you've got bigger problems on your hand anyways than who's going to replace him. So that's a hard job to fill regardless of who's going to be back there. I think with the defense, what's interesting when I looked at it is you're both right. A lot of McCann's numbers last year were not very good. And while it was always seen that McCann was maybe better than Rutschman at controlling the run game, which I think he has been a little bit better over the last 2 years than Rutschman in that regard, Sanchez is about the same. So you're not really looking to step backwards there. And I also like the fact that he can do some of the same things that McCann did, where you can put him at first base or DH. And if there is a day where it makes sense to have him and Adley in the lineup, that's still going to work. The difference now versus McCann is that Sanchez gives you home run power that McCann didn't.
Yeah, and just a bigger ability to get on base. I think that's one thing a lot of Orioles fans wanted, right? We need more guys on base. And both of these, O'Neill and Sanchez, are upgrades in those respective departments. And, like, I also think, too, just you can't measure this. Obviously, it's just whatever. But I think with both these guys, I like the attitude they bring. I've seen a couple people mention this as well. It's like, I don't know if the Orioles, clubhouse is full of, complete nice guys. They're I'm sure Gunner's a hothead. Come on. But like, I like this attitude they're bringing into the clubhouse as well. Take that for what you will. Like, these are veterans who have been around the block. They've been there, done that. Sanchez has played for some successful teams, and these are guys like they're not going to take any crap. I think the Orioles infusing that into this Orioles clubhouse is going to be beneficial as well. Yeah, you've got some Lego Knights and the nerdy Knights and stuff, but you've also bringing in some guys. Apparently, Tyler O'Neill might fit in there as well in that aspect. But I feel like you've got some guys who are just going to come in and on that field, like it's not going to change who the Baltimore Orioles are, but just provide that little bit of edge on the field. I like it. I like both of these signings. So.
Yeah, and like you said, we're bringing in power and with a little extra walk. So we know the Orioles are going to hit home runs. Let's just have a few more people on base for when we do.
Now, we are coming up in the winter meetings in Dallas, and we plan to be back on later this week, probably Wednesday, unless there's another major move between now and then that prompts us to do an emergency. So we will be back on Wednesday, but I want to throw this question out before we wrap up this episode, which is where do the Orioles go from here? They filled two pretty clear needs fairly early in the offseason, but you could still look down the checklist and see a lot of open, unchecked boxes, whether it's starting pitching, specifically the top of the rotation. Maybe there's a case for rounding out other parts of the positional player roster. And then obviously the bullpen is something they're going to have to address with Jacob Webb and Danny Coulombe no longer around. So if you want to throw out specific players, either one of you can, or you just want to give a general overview on your thoughts, where do you think the Orioles go from here?
Well, I think they certainly need two starting pitchers. One, hopefully top of the rotation guy, and then maybe another middle of the rotation guy or a guy with some upside. So I'll just refer to my dream offseason post, and so far it's gone pretty well. I have us bringing Corbin Burns back, but if it's not him, then maybe you trade for Garrett Crochet, Framber Valdez, Pablo Lopez apparently is an option. I've seen people mentioning more now. Sandy Alcantara for the from the Marlins, but you got to get a top of the rotation guy, and then Nathan Eovaldi as a second guy would be pretty nice. Or I was going to say, I've said Sean Manaea in my article, but I don't think we're going to sign him because of the draft pick compensation loss, which makes sense. So you get a guy like Eovaldi or someone in that tier for starting pitching, and then we might be done offensively, honestly. But if you want to do the move that I'm proposing, it's trade for Josh Naylor from the Guardians. He's in the last year of his deal. If you want to upgrade first base, I think that's a way to do it. And then I have the Orioles trading Ryan O'Hearn to the Detroit Tigers for Alex Lang, a relief pitcher with great stuff but not great command, which is Gregory Soto, Sir Anthony Dominguez, Felix Bautista. Pretty much every reliever that the Orioles have targeted have been that. And he has an option next year, so that would add some flexibility. Maybe the Tigers could use the offense with, platoon with Torkelson at first base, some DH time for O'Hearn, just like he did for the Orioles. I don't know. Maybe that's a mutual beneficial type of trade that could happen. But other than that, I think they're just going to work the margins and continue to work the waiver wire as they do. If a trade opportunity comes up, like Jorge Mateo or Ramon Arias for a reliever, or like we said, the backup fifth outfielder, what have you, then that could happen later on in the offseason. But I think offensively, unless they want to make that big move, they're done. But they got to get at least 2 starting pitchers, and 1 relief pitcher would be nice too.
So funny enough, you mentioned Alex Lang. This is the time of the year where I pull out of the park baseball again, and I got the 2022 Orioles, and the rebuilding has begun, and I traded for Alex Lang to be more so just take the beating, take the lumps this losing season. But yeah, it's the off season, the winter meetings. You don't have to make a move. I feel like if you want to make upgrades, sure, I'm all for it. You want to bring in Josh Naylor? Absolutely, down for it. I don't think they have to, though, just because, again, O'Neill's contract situation doesn't necessarily mean you need to move on from some of these other guys. But there are areas still of the offense where you could upgrade. I think it's got to be pitching again. I really wish not to go on another whole half hour segment here on this, but I do wish this qualifying offer BS would just stop. Go Les Snead, LA Rams, F them picks. Come on. I've got an MLB draft article in the chamber scheduled to go out on Monday morning. I love the MLB draft, but even then, I like Sean Manaea more. I like Nick Pivetta more. I like Max Fried a whole lot more. Tyler O'Neill's a win now move. I would love for them to go after one of these top guys and not have to roll out Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Nathan Eovaldi, your top 3 in rotation. Of course, you can still go off with the trade, obviously, but there's an opportunity to land Manaea, Pivetta, one of these other guys as well. If there's mutual interest there, I'd like to see the Orioles be aggressive and go after those guys as well this offseason. But I think at the winter meetings, it's pitching. I think that's got to be the focus, and no more of. You always can't help it; it's a 2-way street. But when it comes down to pitching, no more. They were aggressively in on this guy. Let's bring in one of these big fish, or let's pull that trigger on that big trade and make something happen. It's the ace thing. I think is unsettling for everybody. It's who's going to be that ace, and until we have that in place, once that's in place, I feel like anything else that happens, I don't care. If you want to bring in, some of these guys, avoid the qualifying offer thing, sure, go for it. No big issue. But until then, that's the unsettling part, I think, for me.
Yeah, I agree. But I do want to say that the report that's coming out that the Orioles are avoiding the qualifying offer, we know that's not coming from the Orioles front office because they don't leak. So it must be coming from an agent. So a little bit of a grain of salt. Maybe we made an offer for Max Fried because obviously I think if you're getting Fried, you're fine getting, losing a draft pick. Maybe we made an offer, or at least had conversations with Fried and realized, okay, he's either going back to Atlanta or LA. Even if we give him 6 years, whatever million, then he's not going to choose us. So moved on from him, and they just thought about it. But Manaea and Pivetta, not really worth risking losing a draft pick when there's similar guys out there that you wouldn't have to. So it's an easy way for something to get blown up, because if it's true that hard line stance, nope, we're never giving up a draft pick with the qualifying offer player, yeah, that's ridiculous. But I doubt it's quite like that.
Yeah, I agree. I do think there's a little bit more nuance to that, but we'll have to see what happens the rest of the way this offseason. We'll have our eye on the winter meetings, and hopefully something happens here in the next few days. But don't forget, if it doesn't, the offseason does not end at the end of the winter meetings. In fact, the Orioles didn't trade for Corbin Burnes until February 1st last year. So something to keep in mind as we inch closer to spring training. And of course, leading up to them, we will have plenty of coverage for you here at Orioles on the Verge. We'll be back later this week. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, X, TikTok, YouTube, and Blue Sky. We're also over at Substack, OriolesOnTheVerge.substack.com. We're seeing some new subscribers come in. Love the feedback that we're getting there. And as Nick mentioned, he'll have a new article out on Monday. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon and sign up to become a member. And if you're an existing member, consider gifting a membership to a friend or family member who wants more Orioles coverage in their life. We have $3, $5, and $10 levels. And sometime here in the next few weeks, we will be starting our top 50 prospects countdown, daily episodes that are exclusive to patrons. You're not going to want to miss that. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by BetOnline and part of the Believe Podcast Network.